Hello, Phil Croshaw here again from Passions, and in this episode, it's all about Peru. No, not the country, this Peru. Enjoy. Hello there, and a very warm welcome to the latest edition of Passions. And today I'm so pleased to be joined by Perou. And Perou is in the creative sector. He's in photography and all that kind of wonderful creative stuff. And we're going to talk today about his passions. So without further ado, welcome Perou to Passions. Tell us who you are and what you're passionate about.
I am Perou. And I am passionate about pictures, all kinds of pictures, stills and moving images. I like to think of myself as an iconographer, not a photographer, which is a very egocentric way of saying I try and make pictures that people will remember and not just blend into the dross of oversaturated blurb that comes out.
Yeah, it's interesting, isn't it? We'll talk about that a little bit, but tell me how you got into this. As I asked most of my guests, is it something that you picked up a little camera when you were 2? How did it all develop? How did it come about? What's the story?
Kind of by accident, almost. I sort of had a vague interest in photography because my parents took in a lodger when I was a kid, and he had aspirations to be a Fleet Street photographer. So he would be developing films in our bathroom, and he was a hippie and he liked to smoke weed, and he was cool. I sort of thought he was the nuts, And I don't think he ever got to be a Fleet Street photographer as it goes, but he was quite an inspirational fellow. And I sort of had an interest in taking photographs. I wasn't able to draw. I could draw, but I was a sort of failed artist, as many photographers are. It's a lot easier to press a button than to draw something. So, I sort of had a vague interest in photography, although at the time I left school, I was considering being a long-distance lorry driver because I loved the film Convoy, the 1970s film Convoy, Big 10-4, we got a rubber duck.
Remember it well.
Yeah, so that was also, I was very easily influenced, obviously. So I saw a film, I thought I'd be a long distance lorry driver. We had a lodger who was a Fleet Street photographer, and I wanted to be a photographer. I didn't really want to be a photographer. And then also, this isn't a real dog collar, I just must admit, just in case it confuses anybody, especially as I'm about to say that I was also considering being a missionary, a Christian missionary in, so this would have been 1998, and I was sort of living a Christian life at that time, and I thought I was maybe being called into that sort of missionary work, and I had a crisis of faith. I saw the dark side. I realized I didn't want to be a long distance lorry driver in England because it wasn't quite the same as being a big rig driver in America. And my dad was working in a college where there were one of the very few photography courses in the country, and said, oh, you know, I think I can get you onto the photography course if you want to get onto that. And I was like, why not? I've got nothing else going on, which I did for a year. Then I dropped out and became a butler to a viscount for a year, as you do. And then realized that a life of servitude probably wasn't right for me. And I went back to finish my BTEC in photography before doing a degree in photography, before becoming unemployed as a photographer, as most sort of photographers that had done degrees in photography became unemployed. Yeah, I've gone the usual route. There's two routes actually. It's sort of, when I started, there are two routes in photography. One is you did a degree and then became unemployed and did something completely unrelated to photography, or you started working in a hire studio and started assisting other photographers and became a successful photographer. So I went one route first. I went the degree in photography route, which was a disaster. And then I started working in a hire studio and assisting for other photographers for a little while, which is where I learned how to be a photographer.
Just so interesting. Have you ever, and you may not have done, but have you ever reflected about what it is about photography that grips you, that creates that passion, that makes you want to do it so deeply? I've thought about this myself, and I'm still trying to figure it out. You know, as I mentioned before we came on air, I love vlogging and I love podcasting and I love teaching people. I'm trying, and I do this channel with Spencer, and I've still not kind of worked out what it is about it that I love about it so much. Have you ever reflected on that?
Often, as it goes, because I think there are lots of photographers, especially lots of photographers of my age and era, that don't really enjoy taking photographs. You know, it's been a job for them and it's been a profession. Whereas for me, this has never been a job. You know, I'm very lucky that I've been able to make some money from it, but that's a bonus. And taking photographs really sometimes is more than a passion. It's more of a compulsion. And it's also how I identify as Perou the photographer. So there are times, like during COVID lockdowns, where I might not be taking as many photographs as I would normally be taking. And I get really confused because I go around telling people I'm Perou the photographer. When I'm not taking photographs, then that challenges who Perou the photographer is. And I get very, you know, it's quite distressing. So I have to go out and take photographs just to prove to myself that I am still Perou the photographer, if you understand what I'm saying. So all sort of photographers that need to identify as a photographer will be doing projects. And there's been so many photographers doing projects all through lockdown. And, you know, all the time, if I'm not being employed by somebody to take photographs for money, I will be photographing something. Every day I take photographs. Every day I carry a camera with me. If I don't have my camera with me, say, for example, I'm feeling lazy and I'll go out on a bike ride and I don't have my sort of decent camera with me and I've only got my iPhone and I see something and I have to take it on my iPhone, I'm like frustrated so badly that I will come home, pick up my camera and go and try and find what I photographed, you know. So yeah, it's every day, all the time. And this has sort of been something that's developed over time. So when I started out taking photographs, I wasn't as passionate about it. It was a sort of an enabler in some ways. You know, it enabled me to have purpose, to be in certain places. You know, I was the photographer, so I got to be there to do that. And you know, it's given me opportunity to travel around the world. It's given me opportunity to meet like the most incredible people in the world, and it's really given me opportunities. But it's not, the opportunities aren't about money. They're about, that really is, I know it sounds stupid and I'm really fortunate because I've got enough money that I can say that. But the money is like, incidental to the experience of being there taking the photographs. It's also difficult for my clients sometimes because the photograph itself is incidental to me being there taking the photographs. The experience of meeting somebody is far more important than the photograph to me that I come away with. Whereas to my clients, obviously, they don't care about the experience that I'm having. They care about the photograph that they get at the end of it.
How do you deal with the subjectivity of a photograph? You know, I suppose it's like all art, isn't it? Beauty's in the eye of the beholder and all that kind of thing. You know, and you take the picture that you think is absolutely fantastic, but then if it's a corporate, for example, just as an example, where you have 4 people looking at it and every single one of them thinks something different, how do you deal with that, especially if you are very, very happy with the end result? Do you kind of challenge them on it and explain it? How do you deal with that?
At the beginning, it was really difficult because obviously as a photographer, you're led to believe that you're the most important part of the equation. And, you know, it's the way that you see the world that they're buying, and it's your name on the picture and so on and so forth. So there are lots of photographers, including myself, less now than maybe in the past, but there's a lot of photographers that have really big ego problems. And, you know, I used to believe strongly that my opinion was more important than everybody else's, especially if I had taken the photograph. Then obviously the picture that I say is the right picture is clearly going to be the right picture because I was there. And, you know, these days I've become sort of resigned to the fact that I will do a series of pictures and there'll be some that I think are better than others, but the people that are paying for the pictures often will not have the same level of appreciation as I will, or the sort of, you know, I am a master craftsman in this field. There are some people that employ me that have sort of started as receptionists in offices, worked their way up through sort of the company and are now in a position to employ a photographer, but they're not particularly visually literate people. And their sort of interest in a picture isn't necessarily sort of what's the word, educated, I would say, you know. So it's quite frustrating at times, but at the end of the day, I'm what I say is eyes for hires. So you know, if somebody's employing me to photograph something, then I will give them what they want, and it's less about me these days and more about facilitating something that somebody else wants professionally.
It's very interesting, isn't it, that what fascinates me is you've had a fair amount of success. I don't think it's unfair to say that. A fair amount of success doing what you're doing. You just said you've traveled the world. Lots of people enjoy photography. It's quite a popular hobby around the world, never mind just in the UK.
Everybody's a photographer.
Especially now. What can we say, you know? But what, you know, again, it's a little bit of a crass question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. What would you say the secrets of your success have been? And in inverted commas, what would you say when you reflect, what would you say the main drivers have been that have allowed you, frankly, to make a good, reasonable, good living out of it and to travel the world versus somebody else who may not achieve that?
I think one thing to say is that it's all subjective. And, you know, what one person might consider is very successful in terms of, you know, me as a photographer, if you take it like that, like a younger, smaller photographer might look at me and go, oh, he's very successful. Whereas I might look at other photographers and go, they're very successful. There's always going to be someone who's doing better jobs than you, earning more money than you, more famous, more successful, you know. So it's been because photography has no specific sort of reward structure. If you were to work in a job and you achieve this success, you'll receive this sort of accolade or, you know, a reward. In photography, there's none. So really, we can often photographers will look at other photographers and value themselves and judge themselves against other photographers. and find their sort of feel comfortable about their position by looking at other photographers, if you understand what I'm saying.
Yes, I do.
I have found it important not to do that. So I can only, if I enjoy my work and I like what I'm doing, then that is my reward. If I'm enjoying the photographs that I'm taking, I find it really negative to look at other people and to think about how you relate to them and they relate to you, and how you see yourself in that sort of structure. But there are a lot of very competitive people in my industry that really value themselves by looking at other people. So I've gone out of my way to be as uncompetitive as possible. I don't generally look at other photographers of my own sort of peers' work and worry about what they're doing, the jobs that they're doing, or what I'm not doing. And I just take great joy from doing what I do for myself. Like I say, it is like a compulsion, or it is my passion. It's something that I take tremendous pleasure from. So that's the reward that is good for me.
Yeah,
I think it answered your question. Actually, maybe I went off on
no, it absolutely does. No, it absolutely does. And I think arguably what you're talking about is a superb definition of what passion's all about. I mean, this part of this journey of interviewing people is about finding out about where people get their passions from, what drives those passions, and arguably at the same time in the background trying to research what exactly is a passion and where does a passion start and where does an interest start and end, and where, at what point does it become a passion, and what point does it become an obsession, like you said. And it's trying to figure that out. But I think where people are talking about, it's almost like the money's we've all got to live and earn, we've all got to earn a living, we've all got to pay the bills, but you still just love it for doing it. And I think that's probably the definition I'm coming across now, which is more, that's what a passion really is.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sort of known for certain sets of photographs. Like I've photographed the rock star Marilyn Manson a lot over the last 22 years, and I've done a book of 21 years of pictures of him, and I've sort of done projects on clowns, and I did a book on clowns myself as a clown in different like clown makeups and stuff. And I've done the book that's coming out at the moment is about underpasses at night. Those are sort of things that people see that I've done and go, oh, he's really into clowns, or he's really into Marilyn Manson's music, or he's really into underpasses. That's people think I'm obsessed about underpasses at the moment. All of those things gave me equal amounts of pleasure. Or like the big cat sanctuary stuff that we did, where we photographed real lions and tigers in lions' dens. And I enjoy all of that, but like I enjoy them equally. And I also like do things that people don't know anything at all about. Like I will do painkiller commercials, or I will do toothpaste ads. You will not see my name on it, but I will be paid to photograph people. Last year I was laughing saying that I was the Botox king, because I did a Botox ad, and I did something else, Juvederm. I did, they're probably even conflicting, companies, but I'm full on to that. I enjoyed taking those pictures of people smiling, showing off their beautiful facial fillers,
Marilyn Manson to teeth whitener. That's an amazing eclectic mix.
It's all photographs, and I'm enjoying it all equally. I really enjoy doing jobs where I get paid to take photographs. There's a real pleasure in receiving money. It's like this sort of it just seems like so ridiculous sometimes that somebody would pay you to do something that you were enjoying anyway. Just makes it a really nice thing. I really like getting paid for taking photographs.
Have you noticed any changes over the years as it's become, as we said a minute ago, it's just become so easy to have the latest smartphone and a camera on it that frankly, would have probably been about 10 grand only about 10 years ago. Are people kind of a little bit less appreciative of what goes into it because they can just go like that and have a picture of a swan?
Yes, it's funny you should say that.
Yeah.
The photographer has become very devalued within the sort of the pyramid of power on a photo shoot. You know, it used to be that everybody would look to the photographer as the director and the auteur of a shoot, and that their vision was very important, and the photographer was always the most important person on the photo shoot. Maybe after the art director, who was sort of mainly the photographer's client, art director, then photographer. Then, you know, now these days, and I don't begrudge them, but now these days the hairstylist is more important than the photographer. The makeup artist is more important than the clothes stylist. Anybody could take the photograph, or that's the sort of thought in people's mind. And often because we're all, you know, a lot of professional photographers are all shooting on the same sort of digital cameras. They all have the same kind of feel. And because everybody has a camera phone and can get a reasonable photograph out of the camera phone, everybody thinks it's really easy to be a photographer. And so why do we have to pay this old photographer 20 times more than we could pay this kid who's got a camera? And, you know, if it looks a bit crap, at the end of it, we can Photoshop it to make it look all right anyway. You know, that's an unfortunate situation, because good clients understand that there's more to being a photographer than just pressing a button. And in fact, in the old days, I used to joke and say to people, you know, when they say, what do you do for a living? I'd say I press a button. Now, these days, I'm going around going, there's more to it than just pressing a button, you know. And often now, when I'm shooting for new clients that have been working with what we call kids with cameras, they're gobsmacked the difference in quality that I will produce, and the sort of experience of being on a photo shoot with a photographer that's been doing it for years. You know, I don't want to sound like a sort of cynical, annoyed, old, you know, replaced, derelict photographer, because there's these young kids coming out and doing the job cheaper and effectively. But there is more to being a photographer than pressing a button, and you have to have vision. And, you know, for me, I photograph people a lot, and you might not be able to tell on this podcast, but I think that my people skills on a shoot, at least, are very important to what comes out of the picture at the end of the day.
Oh, I'm sure that's true, in terms of just the confidence element of it. And so much of it, so much of life, I think now more than ever, is psychology. Everything. I mean, I'm a business consultant by trade and do a lot of digital media and stuff. And it's so much of it is about psychology. You know, how do you influence people? How do you get people to know, like, and trust you? We talk a lot about, which of course is just as relevant to what you're talking about. Do you get to a point though with you, when you get to a certain level of experience, where the networks that you've built over the years are critical, in that you are maybe works coming from people who you know, you've worked with for some time, who already know, like, and trust you, and will just automatically kind of call you when they have a project? Or do you have to be continually driving the lead generation process?
You would hope, and as I had hoped, that by this point in my career, like, as I say, 25 years I've been taking photographs, that I would have built up enough contacts and that I could live off that now. But unfortunately, when I started, I was that egomaniac arse pain that I mentioned earlier, and I wasn't interested in making friends with anybody. I thought my world was revolving around me, and I was very bad at, like, making friends with people who, if I had made, are now in positions of real power and could have really helped me at this point and would be booking me. So that was one of my greatest mistakes, that when I started out, I thought I was an island and I didn't need anybody else, and I could have been networking and making great contacts. that was a real mistake. And now a lot of the people that I have sort of grown with over the years of working together have left the business. They're no longer in a position to employ me, and I remain a photographer, but they are no longer art directors in magazines. The magazines that I used to shoot for don't exist anymore, so it is very different. I'm just going to tell my kid to be quiet. Hold on 1 second.
It's okay.
Be quiet, please. Maybe,
yeah, it happens all the time.
It's
called the pandemic issue.
I know
it happens all the time.
Cats like jumping on the arm.
Yeah, I was doing one interview actually where the guy's wife came back and started putting a maiden up and putting smalls and stuff on me.
Good job.
Turning around going, I'm doing an interview, love. Can you?
I know.
I know. So it's perfectly normal stuff.
So I don't want to sound. There is a hope. Maybe you can edit me out in this, but I don't want to sound like a sort of pissed off about the situation, and because although the industry is in a really bad place, I remain entirely enthusiastic about taking photographs every day. I will just get paid less for it, and that's okay, because the money isn't the most important thing to me, as I said previously. And I will move more into doing projects and more into sort of gallery work and pleasing myself in photography, rather than trying to please people that are doing toothpaste ads or photographing people for a magazine, for a page in a magazine and that.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned in the magazines there a few times, Perou, and obviously there's some massive changes been going on. I mean, God, it feels like an understatement to say massive changes. I would say revolutionary changes, probably driven mainly maybe by technology as well as attitudes. So you mentioned there about magazines. What's the situation now? I mean, people still read magazines, I guess, but have you got any feel for whether the demand is still there, or is it still in the background there, or is it completely disappeared, and will it disappear altogether, do you think, in a few years?
I honestly feel that editorial, which has been like the greater part of my business, is dead. And a lot of people that still love magazines of our age and maybe younger will find that offensive and will think that's a really bad thing to say. But my kids and all of my kids' friends and other kids that I know are not interested in buying paper products like newspapers or magazines. They're interested in seeing stuff on TikTok and Instagram. And in fact, my kids pretty much Snapchat, Instagram. I don't think they do TikTok, but I know, it's obviously very popular. And they want their information delivered in 2-second bursts. So they have like terrible concentration spans. For them to sit with us and watch a 30-minute TV show is, they'll be like going, how long is this? Or, if it was an hour, they'd be like, halfway through it, they'd be going, how long is this show going on for? It's half an hour. It's quite incredible and just disappointing, troubling. But I personally have books. I had a book come out last year. I've got a book coming out this year. I've got a book coming out next year. And, we will continue to make books and we will continue to make magazines, but they will be very niche and, presumably considered unenvironmentally friendly, because you have to knock down trees to make them. So it is a change, and we can sort of mourn the loss of magazines and editorial, but actually it's just evolution and things are moving on, and you can't get upset about it and worry yourself. The problem for me is that because there is so much coming out, because it kind of makes the imagery that's coming out disposable, because people just want to see it and then move on. Whereas my whole thing in my sort of professional world has been to do iconic photography that makes people really stop. So when people look at my work or my portfolio, they go, oh, you did this one. oh, this one. Oh, okay. And the pictures are remembered. And when you see them, you don't forget them. Whereas because there's this barrage of constant bad photographs being produced, they just blur into a blob of nothingness. And it's very hard. You know, the level for doing something that is actually memorable has to be, you know, considerably shocking. You know, whether it's gratuitous, you know, violent, sexual, whatever, to sort of pierce that barrage of constant imagery, you really have to do something very, very different. So I'm not excited about that. I'm not excited about bad photography taken on iPhones, and I sort of I do mourn the loss of sort of really high production, big photo shoots that were expensive to do, that result in like really amazing, iconic photography. I think we're losing that. An example of that would be that I photographed the band U2, the Irish rock band U2, at their house in the south of France. And Bono and the Edge lived together in the same colossal beachfront castle in the south of France. And they live in sort of separate wings of the same enormous place. And it's so big, in fact, that when we were shooting there, we were at this bit of building, and it was like this vast thing, and it had a terrace with a huge table on it set out for lunch and that. And I was sort of looking around going, wow, and it had a cinema room and it had gyms, and I was going, wow, how long have you lived here? And they go, oh no, this is the guest house. We live over there. And pointed in the background. It was like a bigger house. It was like absolutely amazing. But for me to be there shooting this cover of a magazine that no longer exists anymore. It was an American music magazine called Blender. So I was there in the south of France for 5 days with 5 assistants, and we did a shoot. I did a shot of them in the sea. So I had 4 assistants in the sea with electric battery packs on their heads, cabled string, like a daisy chain of cables, so that they weren't electrocuted, so that my flash would work while I photographed the band in the sea.
Oh,
and I did this photograph of them as a wave sort of crashed behind them and splashed, and they're all together laughing in the spray. And it's a really, if I say so myself, it's a very iconic photograph of U2. That shoot probably cost $30,000 minimum. But that photograph, you look at it today and it's still an iconic photograph of that band, and it will always be an iconic photograph of that band. And they're just, you know, if it's just being photographed, you know, they might get in the sea and they might be, you know, somebody might take a snap of them on their iPhone, of them sort of laughing around in the sea as a wave hit them, and it would have cost a lot less. But it will appear on Instagram and it will be gone minutes later. And, you know, the next day, there'll be another photograph of them, another photograph of them, another photograph of them. And that's great because there's lots of content. And if you're into U2, you get to see them doing all the stuff. But that sort of artistry and the skill and that actual sort of culmination of greatness is gone. And I sort of am disappointed about that.
Yeah, it's true. Do you think, though, that despite the digital age, we all still love a good story, don't we? Do you think?
Well, it's interesting because I have been saying to my children for a long time as they've been growing up that words, and you might find this strange as a photographer, but especially a photographer who believes that a picture speaks 1,000 words, words are more important than photographs. These days, now more than ever. So I'm often sort of bothered about the fact that if I'm doing a photo shoot, for example, if I was doing a photo shoot, I was asked to do a photo shoot for Virgin Trains years ago. And the idea of the photo shoot was that I would photograph somebody against a grey background with a red tie flapping in the wind. That was all. But that job was tendered out to 5 different photographers, and we had to write in words how we were going to photograph somebody standing against a grey background with their tie flapping. And we would be judged on our words, who could write about that best. Not, you know, we could all take the photograph, but it came down to how well we could write about how we were going to take the photograph. And that is very common in photography, in professional photography now, that you need to write a treatment for what you're going to do. You know, essentially, I'm going to photograph this guy on a grey background. He's going to be wearing a red tie. I'll use a wind machine. It will flap. But you have to write that in 2 pages and make it very exciting. Use lots of adjectives and, you know, be enthusiastic about how you're going to photograph somebody standing against a grey background. So now more than ever, words are tremendously important. And often, like, for me, good photography doesn't need words. And it, to me, a sign of a bad photograph is if you need a story to explain what is going on. But that is a very common thing as well, that you'll get a really bad photograph and then a written explanation of how you should be reading this photograph. Well, photography is a language, and we should be saying stuff. We should be able to communicate cross-culturally, cross-language. You know, it should be clear what somebody is saying. So I always say, as a photographer, it's very important that you have got something to say, and that you don't just open your mouth and, you know, nice, pretty pictures come out, but they don't mean anything. You know, photography is a language. We need to be communicating with each other.
I think for me personally, the power of where I would say words and images, for me, as I say, this is just for me, is where you see the picture, but then the words perhaps underneath set some context for the picture, or there's a story behind it. So you kind of did it for me there. You know, in my imagination, I was on this beach. I wish I was on this beach. Do you remember those days? I wish I was. Yeah, I was on this beach with, you know, with you two in the surf, and I had all these people with the lights, and it's you know, the story, the context of that, and then seeing the image next to that. I think that would be really powerful for me, because you got best of both worlds in a sense then.
Well, that's me exactly contradicting myself, because my next book is all about pictures and the stories that go with them. So, you know, discount everything I just said and go with that second one. But also, because writing for me is very difficult. I'm not a natural writer. I'm a very slow reader. I find it hard to read. I might read the same page from a book like 6 times over the course of a week before I can move on. For the last, since 2001, I started an online diary. And in 2005, that became pictures and words. So every day I will write an online diary entry, and it'll be pictures and words. Some days it'll be about my trip to B&Q to buy a doorknob. Some days it'll be about photographing Vice President Al Gore and what was said then. So some days it's better than others, is what I'm trying to say. But I've forced myself to write every day so that I can get better at writing, so that I can write 200 words about how to photograph somebody in front of a grey background. I agree with you. I think the context of the backstory of a picture that you can't get from the actual picture is fascinating and interesting, and hopefully that's why my book will also be fascinating and interesting. But I think in terms of like a photograph, it should be able to communicate. It's a separate thing, I think, you know. Photograph that should be able to communicate what the photographer is trying to say in the photograph without words. That should be able to happen. But then as a separate thing, the backstory is going to be really interesting in words as well.
Yeah, and of course now we're into the world of vlogging, aren't we? It's all about, no mind diaries, it's about video diaries.
Yes.
And some very, very wealthy people on YouTube producing vlogs, and that's a thing now, and that's obviously changed significantly as well. Has the video element ever been attractive to you at all, or is it just pictures? Can you ever imagine moving more to the moving picture?
I still see the world in stills. Still, I prefer stills, because when you're shooting stills, it's an autonomous thing. I can do it on my own, and I don't need a crew around me. But I have directed a few things. I've directed a Marilyn Manson video with my friend Bill. I've directed a Katie Tunstall video that was quite successful, but I don't enjoy making films. And I'm sort of half kicking myself that we didn't start a YouTube channel 10 years ago when I was photographing people like David Beckham, and we could have just had a film camera there, and I could have been talking to David Beckham as I'm photographing him, and it would all been videoed, and I'm sure I'd have had a large following these days. But now, and you know, 10 years ago, I didn't mind seeing myself in front of a camera, and I did quite a lot of TV shows, you know, as various sort of reality show TV judges and things like nonsense. But these days, I prefer not to see myself in front of a camera. So you know, I think I've probably missed the moment for doing a YouTube channel. And, you know, I don't think a YouTube channel about photographing empty underpasses at night would be the right way to go anyway.
Not convinced, you know.
About what?
I'm just about whether I think there's possibly it might not be something you want to do, but I think there is an opportunity. I think maybe the great thing about YouTube, of course, is that there might be videos, but there can be videos of stills.
Yeah.
Add the music, add the right music in, and of course, music makes a big difference to the emotion of a lot of things, doesn't it? As we know on movies and TV shows and such like. I think actually that if you had if you were doing range of photographs with some music in the background as a YouTube video, I think people would watch that. I would.
No, I don't doubt they'd watch it. No, for sure. We actually are writing it's funny because I was asked to do a TV show, a really good TV show, just before lockdown, just as lockdown was happening. I was in the middle of 3 really exciting projects. One of them was to travel around the world presenting a TV show that was just like a dream job. And it was going to like really extreme remote parts of the world. So like I'd be hanging out with Inuits. I'd be hanging out in the Amazon rainforest. Wow. I'd be all over the world. Wow. It was a great job. And I was like the man for the job. And I was like, this is going to be a great year. Nope. And
that must have taken being pissed off to a whole new level with the pandemic.
I had the book coming out, and we had some really big exhibitions that were booked in, and I did one. I wasn't able to go to it in Malaga, in the cultural centre in Malaga, and I had to do a Zoom conference call to say hi, welcome to my exhibition, which I'm not at, which was very upsetting. And you know, we were going to do a world tour of the book that I just released, with exhibitions and like all kinds of meet and greets and gallery shows, all cancelled. So that was upsetting, and it's not coming back because the book's been out for 2 years now. But that was upsetting. But one of the people that I work with a lot is called Paul from Peter and Paul, this design agency based in Sheffield. And we are writing a documentary at the moment that will see me going back to a project that I did 20 years ago. I can't really talk too much more about it, but 20 years ago, I did a project in Japan. And I'm going to go back and find the people that I photographed 20 years ago and see if they're still alive, see if they're alive, what they're doing now.
Oh, love that.
And
love that idea.
Yeah, hopefully that will come out, and that'll be good. So there's always like
and of course, hopefully maybe we'll all be a little bit more appreciative of these things. You know, if you're traveling all over the world, I've traveled myself for quite a lot over the years, and there's a bit of you take it for granted. Oh, it's another beautiful blue sea, or it's another mountain range, or it's another snow peak or whatever. But I think there's a good chance that we'll appreciate it more, having had it taken away. Do you think?
I've even appreciated going to the pub.
You never thought you'd be saying that, did you?
No, 2 years ago. I'm not really bothered, about going to the pub. But like, we used to eat out, fairly regularly, and just, not being able to eat out I've even missed people. you know, and I used to enjoy not seeing people. Now I'm craving hugging people, just randomly hugging people in the street, you know. Just feels good to be out. I mean, it feels right at this precise moment, you know, we're sort of half unlocked, and you know there are restaurants open, and you know in gardens and stuff, and it sort of, it feels, I went to the Tate Modern the other day, and you sort of feel almost like you're doing something that you shouldn't be doing, and you feel a bit naughty, and it feels a bit odd still. But I would, yeah, we all miss the old normal, and be good to go back to some sort of social norm.
Yeah, that sinking feeling when you go in somewhere and you're about 5 minutes walk away from the car and then go, oh God, mask, left the mask in the car. That's a pandemic world scenario, but it drives me crazy.
Yeah.
Perou, thank you very much for joining me today. I've really enjoyed talking to you.
Nice
I guess final question, I suppose, is, do you think you've taken the perfect photograph?
Oh, well, that's very difficult to say. So, like I said, at the moment, I'm trying to fit 25 years of photographs into a 272-page book with words as well, which is impossible. I've not. I don't think there is such a thing as the perfect photograph, to be honest. And like, I'm only interested in the next photograph, to be honest. Like I said to you before, the experience of taking the photograph is more important than the photograph. So the photographs that I have are just residual traces for me to remember where I've been and who I've met. And so I'm always interested in who I'm meeting next, or what I'm going to photograph next. And the past doesn't really interest me so much.
Wonderful. Really enjoyed that. Thanks, Perou. Some really great stuff there. Some really great insights. And hopefully I'll get to meet you. I say there's a lot of guests at the moment. Hopefully I'll get to meet you in the real world at some point.
Nice
maybe
one, yeah, that'd be great.
with my co-partner in this project, Spencer Phillips, who was kind enough to introduce us. So thanks very much, mate. Take care and stay safe and all that. And I'll talk to you again at another time. Thank you.
Cheers.
Cheers, Perou.